everyone. Thank you for joining us for a virtual fireside chat with Garrick Tiplady, VP and Country Director, Facebook and Instagram Canada, for discussion on the role technology will play in rebuilding Canada's economy. Garrick is a global business leader with 20 years of experience managing and advising businesses at innovative, mission-driven companies. As Managing Director of Facebook Canada, Garrick ensures that Facebook is a positive contributor to Canada's economic, social, and cultural fabric. He's a strong advocate for the power of technology to enable small businesses and has been deeply involved with Facebook's efforts to support small businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome, Garrick.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So on to some quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Please make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll open up an audience Q&A at the very end of this hour. So now I'd like to introduce our host, Jason Maganoy, Head of Business Development at St. Joseph Media and new Associate Publisher at Canadian Business. Thank you both so much for your time today again, and take it away, Jason.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Chantal, and thank you so much for joining us, Garrick. And to give everyone some context on the audience, this is part of a larger program we have at Canadian Business called the Canadian Business Leadership Circle. And we're really excited to have Garrick be a part of that. And, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about all of the stuff, basically. But my question is always the same whenever we kick these off. It's how are you and how have you been holding up during the pandemic?
First of all, Jason, great to see you. Thanks for having me. I am excited to see Canadian Business coming back, and I'm really excited to be part of your leadership circle. So thank you. Pre-COVID, my wife and I traveled quite a bit for work. And I have to say, being home for dinner every night with the family has just been, it's been an unbelievable privilege. Now, on the other hand, and we have 3 kids, the past year and a half, I know it's just come with its own set of challenges. And I think it's just not just for us, like as parents, but I also think the same holds true for kids. Not to digress from the question, but I do worry a little that we underappreciate the toll the pandemic has played on all of our kids. Not just the shift to remote working, but I think more importantly, the lack of physical connection that all of our kids have had. And when you step back even further from that, I actually think it's that lack of physical connection that's probably having a toll on many of us. More broadly speaking, one of the main issues I think we've all become aware of through the pandemic is mental health. It's not only concern for me as a parent, but it's also concern for me as a leader. Now, fortunately, I think one of the positive trends we are seeing is that people are talking more openly about mental health. Because when you look at it, I think pre-COVID, mental health wasn't really talked about in the workplace. And I think that's changed. I think COVID has brought that to the forefront. And what's really important is that it's now at the forefront of industry discussions. And I truly hope that comes with more positive, open, and transparent discussions. Because I do think as leaders, it's our responsibility to support these discussions. And I do hope that continues to be a priority as we move back to the office. Okay, I'm dragging on. I know it's the first question.
No, but that's it.
I was going to say, I do want to talk quickly about getting back to the office because I think it's really important. So first of all, as it relates to small businesses across the country, I've got to say, I have been so impressed with their resiliency, despite all that's been thrown at them. It is pretty incredible to see. And I do hope we can continue to open safely as we all head back to work. And yes, I have spoken a lot, but I will wrap it up with one quick story. We reopened our office at 50% 2 weeks ago. And here's the interesting thing. I was actually pretty hesitant to go back in, which is shocking because I had been waiting a year and a half to get back into the office. But I think with so many, I was just so accustomed to working from home. Now, the interesting part is this, and this is the main part of the story. The second I walked into the office, literally the second I stepped into the door, I had this massive spike of energy and just this renewed enthusiasm that I haven't had in a while. And it really dawned on me that despite talking with the team every day on Zoom, as we have all done, what I've really missed most is that human connection with my team. And so I'm looking forward to that. So very long answer, but I am truly optimistic about next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I thought was so fascinating about my experience just sort of working from home is that it was actually really hard to sort of compartmentalize my life in the sense that I actually was working, I felt like I was working more and working really interesting hours. And my wife and I recently had a child. So I would find that I'd be working around his nap schedule. And it's like all of a sudden I'm emailing people at 1 a.m. So it's like this bit where it was like, you're right. Like, how do you sort of like take control of
Yeah.
sort of like the work-life balance again? And that idea of connecting with people, like we had the relaunch for Canadian Business last week, and literally was like, that was the first time I'd met people.
Yeah.
Like there were people
Yeah.
who
No,
were
it's
new
true.
to the
It's true.
team.
I see that across our team as well. We've got people who have never stepped in the door. I've never met them personally.
It's phenomenal. But that actually takes me to my next question, which is like, tell us about your career. How did you end up at Facebook?
Yeah. So, I think in terms of my career, it's fair to say I have been a classic generalist. I've worked across multiple functions, multiple industries, multiple geographies. The one common theme through all of it, though, is there's been this technology bent. But without going through my resume, but if I take you back to the beginning, I actually started my career working in a nonprofit. I was working with the Heart and Stroke Foundation. From there, I shifted to Procter and Gamble, which for me, quite honestly, was my crash course in business. Then after business school, I worked at the Boston Consulting Group. And I think that the interesting part about that is I was really fortunate to advise Fortune 50 companies across almost every region of the globe. That led me to Rogers, who was a client at the time. And that's really where I cut my teeth as an operator. The other interesting piece is I was really fortunate to spend some time working with Ted Rogers, who, in my view, is still one of the greatest entrepreneurs that this country has seen. And it was really Ted, actually, in many ways, who ignited an entrepreneurial itch of mine. And so I left Rogers to start a number of businesses, one of which was focused on video distribution infrastructure, which ultimately paved the way for me to join Facebook. Now, that said, before going into Facebook, I do also want to touch on some of the volunteer work I'm focused on. I just say that because it's so incredibly important to me. In particular, I am extremely proud of the work that I've been doing with Right to Play. Right to Play, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit whose mission is to protect, educate, and empower children using the power of play. So it's an organization that works with over 2.3 million children in some of the most dangerous and difficult places on earth, helping them stay in school, resist exploitation, overcome prejudice, as well as keeping themselves safe from disease, but also the harsh realities of war. And I think the important piece about that is Right to Play is a great example of communities from across the globe working together. And that ultimately brings me to Facebook. I joined Facebook because of its mission and because I saw it as a platform where I could help drive positive change in this country. And as you said, I'm sure we're going to touch on some of the latest news, but I still see Facebook playing a role in many people's lives. It just crosses so many different industries, so many sectors, businesses, nonprofits, communities. And it's clear to me that Facebook is a force for good. I've been at Facebook almost 4 years now, leading the Canadian organization, and most recently also overseeing our North American scaled business. And through all of that, I've had the pleasure of working with businesses, large and small, and I've had the opportunity to work with creators, but also community leaders from across the country. So, if I step back from all of it, really my professional career, my mix of experience, I think has really helped me find a home at Facebook. But more importantly, I think it's helped me better understand the impact that it drives for so many different communities, as well as so many parts of our economy.
Wow. I mean, that's actually a great way to jump into the main portion, which is, Facebook has been in the news recently a lot, and it's been criticized for a lot of things. And I wanted to address some of them. I wanted to address them one by one. Like the first is, Are Facebook's efforts effective in removing misinformation from the platform?
Yeah, so here's how I look at it. As I've mentioned, Facebook is present in so many people's lives. It's integral to small business, it's integral to community building, and it's really how many people stay connected to friends and families. And I do think for those reasons, we need to be held to the highest possible standards. And I am personally more than happy to engage and discuss the ways we can be better, but I also know that's true of leaders across the rest of the organization. Now, that said, I also don't want to skirt the issue because getting the right balance on all of this is hard and the issues are complex. That said, we are working to try and find the right balance between encouraging free expression, but also promoting a safe and authentic community. And I think the best way to talk about this, let me give you an example. When discussing trade-offs, you really need to think about the impact and types of societal impact. One of the questions I get all the time is, why don't you just remove content that makes people angry, right? Answer seems really obvious. Identify content that makes people angry and just get rid of it, get it off the platform. But then you objectively look at history and see that some of the biggest societal movements, that activism itself has been created out of cases of anger. So the question really is, how do you balance freedom of expression in this case? And so that's really how I've been thinking about it. Now, let me be clear though, just because something is allowed to be posted on Facebook, I actually don't think, and nor does Facebook think, it needs to get distribution. So in other words, we allow people to post as a form of expression, but we're going to label it misinformation. We're going to demote the content, and we're not going to show it at the top of newsfeed. Now, there is no silver bullet to fighting misinformation, but we are trying to address it from a few angles. So let me just walk you through some of the ways that we think about it. One, we're taking strong action against fake accounts and coordinated networks, and we're going to remove them from the platform. Two, we're the only partner or the only company to partner with 80 fact-checking organizations covering 60 different languages across the globe. And we're connecting people with credible information and, more importantly, context for what they're seeing through warning labels as well as other notifications. Now, all said though, there's no playbook for this, but we are working to address it. And we are investing heavily against it. And, just to give you a couple of numbers, because I think it sort of gives it context. In just the last 5 years, we've invested over $13 billion on privacy, security, misinformation. And we now have a team of over 40,000 people working to address these issues.
Wow. So, I mean, that sounds like definitely a step in the right direction. So how, sort of getting more granular, how effective have these efforts been regarding, say, for example, COVID content on the site or the integrity of elections, like, for example, the one we just had here in Canada?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Let me just start by saying, misinformation about COVID or vaccines that could lead to any real world harm has no place on our platforms, and we're going to remove it when we find it. Straightforward. The second piece is we're also removing misinformation that could prevent people from voting. And we did this in the Canadian elections. So whether that's representing dates, locations, times, or methods for voting. So we need to make sure that's also in place and clear. But why don't I talk you through our strategy to stop misinformation? Because I think that's the important part. And in essence, it's got three parts. We're going to remove misinformation when it violates our standards. We're going to reduce distribution when it violates our, we're going to reduce our distribution when our fact checkers deem it so. And then we're also going to inform people through warning labels and notifications when something has been rated partly false. But more importantly for me, though, is actually the impact. Like, what does this all mean in practical terms? So I think COVID's a really good one. I can tell you since the start of the pandemic, we've removed more than 20 million pieces of content from Facebook and Instagram globally. This is content that violated our policies. We've removed over 3,000 accounts, pages, and groups for violating our rules. And we've displayed warnings on more than 190 million pieces of COVID-related content on Facebook that fact checkers deemed as false or partly missing context. The last thing I'll say on this is if removing bad content is part of the equation, the other half of the equation is actually promoting credible information about COVID and vaccines. And we've been doing that here in Canada in coordination with provincial health organizations. And I know that has been effective.
Wow. And that takes me to my next question, which is, does Facebook, like all of this sounds incredible. Does Facebook need to be more transparent about how it runs its business?
Yeah, I actually think on this one, there needs to be greater transparency and accountability across all social media platforms. I recognize we have work to do, as do all platforms. That said, despite all the headlines, we've actually been working on industry-leading solutions for many years now. And if I can, I think it's probably important to touch on a couple of different items. So the first is our community standards enforcement report. This is a report we make public every quarter, and it shows how we're doing around enforcing our community standards across both Facebook and Instagram. So included in this report is how we're tracking on reducing prevalence of things like hate speech, which I'm sure is a question on people's mind. Prevalence is how many times someone is going to see content that can be classified as hate speech in your newsfeed. Now, let me be clear. It's not something we want on our platform. It's something people don't want to see, and it's not something our advertisers want. But prevalence of hate speech now is down to 0.05% of content on Facebook. So that's 5 views for every 10,000 pieces of content. Now, we've made progress. That's a 50% reduction in the last 3 quarters. Now, the question is, do we want that to be 0? Absolutely. But I think you also have to be realistic. Like, this is going to be difficult. So, the way that I think about it is with 1/3 of the world's population on our platforms, you're unfortunately always going to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Second point I would talk about is our independent oversight board, which we created. They provide external and transparent decisions on, honestly, some of the most challenging cases we face. And they also render final and binding content decisions on Facebook. And so that's been an important step. And then the third piece I'd point you to is actually a Canadian example. When we launched our ads library, what we did was allow anyone to see what ads are running anywhere in Canada, including what segments they're reaching. And we're the only platform to provide this level of transparency across the country. We're also giving people transparency about what they can see in their news feed through a feature called Why Am I Seeing This? Think about this as a tool. It's accessible on every piece of content in your feed, including ads. And what it does is it provides you more information and control over your experience on Facebook.
Wow. Yeah, that's you're I think you nailed that. Sort of, there's a lot of work that's been going into this, but also there's a lot of responsibility that I have a lot of control over my Facebook experience. So knowing that there are so many tools available to me to ensure that it's the best experience possible is great. My next question is, there was data released by a former Facebook employee, and it raised questions about the impact of Instagram on young people, particularly girls. So how is Facebook ensuring that the apps are a healthy space for younger Canadians?
Yeah, this one's challenging for me. I have a teenage daughter and 2 teenage boys, so it's front and center. And, the way I look at it, it is just, as a parent, it's so important for me that my kids grow up with confidence that they succeed, they see their successes and their failures through their own eyes and not how other people perceive or how other people judge them. Like, it's so important to me. It's also important they build self-esteem. I want them to develop healthy body images. We want them to be able to talk to us if they're having issues. And so, the Wall Street Journal article that came out, like, it was hard to read. Of course, this is something that I worry about as a parent. But I think it's important to take a step back and actually look at the context of the research, because this is a topic that cannot be about headlines. Like, it just cannot be about headlines. So first off, I have to say, even one teenager having a bad experience on Instagram is too many. Secondly, what I would say is, when you look at the full breadth of the research that we have done, unfortunately, what was released in this story didn't actually show the full picture. So if you look at the entirety of the research, what it actually shows is that a majority of teenage girls who struggled with difficult mental health issues also said Instagram made them feel better rather than worse. Now, I think it's important we have a balanced discussion about this, because if you do look at research, internal and external, it does show that teens have both positive and negative experiences with social media. So to me, it's really important about talking about action. What are the actions we are taking to protect teens? And so as a result of the research we've done, and also informed by experts across the globe, we've added resources to support those struggling with body issues. We've introduced a dedicated reporting option for eating disorder related content.
Wow.
We've included steps to protect vulnerable people from being exposed from bullying without the fear of retaliation. And we are launching vulnerable people against suicide content, I should say, very importantly. And then we've launched Restrict, which is to protect people from bullying. So there's a lot that's going on, but let me just end this by saying, like, we all recognize how important this topic is, not only for the company, but how me as a leader, how important it is. And just, it's so critical that we get this right.
Mm. And it's actually is a perfect segue into my next question, which is, it was one of the things that went viral from the whistleblower from the articles, which was, how do you respond to Frances Hagan's claims that Facebook prioritizes profits over people?
Yeah, I am glad you brought this up, because it is an important conversation. The argument being put forward is that we deliberately push out negative, harmful, and polarizing content. Look, I can't comment on Mrs. Haugen's performance, but from my perspective, leading business in Facebook and business in Canada, like, we have no incentive to do this. Our advertisers, our users, our partners simply don't want to see this content. Like, our business is that we make money from ads, and advertisers consistently tell us they don't want to see their ads next to harmful content. The core of our business, the core values of Facebook is to bring people closer together. And that means nothing if our services are being used in that way. The last thing I'll say on this, it's really important to me personally that I am aligned with the value set of the organization that I'm working with. And I can honestly say, I have not spoken to any leader in this organization who was making decisions that would put people over profit. It just doesn't happen.
Mm. No, you touched upon all the different things that you're integrating into Facebook, and that takes me to sort of now myself, as I use Facebook a lot. Instagram is my favorite app according to my iPhone. I'm on Instagram sometimes 4 hours a day. I love that app. So how can people better control their experience on Facebook?
Yeah, look, I'm glad you brought it up earlier, because I do think giving people more control over their experience on Facebook is actually crucial to them having a positive experience on our platforms. And we do actually provide people a significant amount of control. I think part of the challenge is people don't realize they have these options. Like, I look at myself, right? I probably shouldn't say this, and I know I should, but I don't regularly check settings on all of my apps that I use on a daily basis. And I suspect many of you are the same. I am also guilty of scrolling to the bottom of terms and conditions and clicking approve without reading it thoroughly. But all of these controls do exist on Facebook. And when you look at it, we do actually have industry leading tools for people to control what they see and how they interact on the platform. So let me tell you what we do, because I think that's the important part for those of you who may not know. So in Access Your Information, so this is a tab on Facebook, you can see all the information Facebook has, and you can control how Facebook uses it. We also launched favorites earlier this year, where you can now prioritize posts in your newsfeed from friends and pages that you trust and that you like. You can also now sort newsfeed by most recent. So what that effectively does is switches from algorithmically ranked newsfeed to one that's sorted chronologically. And then lastly, you can also control the ads that you see through the ad preference tools within Facebook. So this allows you to learn more about why you're seeing a particular ad, and then you can also control whether you want to see more or less of that. Now, to your point off the top, one thing I think we can do better is raising awareness of these controls and making sure people are empowered to use them.
Now, this now jumps into sort of the next sort of phase of questions that I have, which is about sort of emerging from the pandemic and basically the concepts of rebuilding Canada, rebuilding our economy, rebuilding our social bonds. Facebook seems to be uniquely positioned to play a role in this rebuild of Canada. So what role will Facebook play as we rebuild the country?
So look, I think, when you look at the pandemic, it really has had a significant impact on almost every business across this country. And, I do believe one of the outcomes is that it's truly transformed business forever. One trend, which you all know and have all lived through, is that digital transformation happened literally overnight as we went into this. Almost every business has had to pivot online, and I understand and appreciate that's created many challenges, but I do also believe it's going to be a net positive. Now, the transformation, why do I think it's positive? The transformation has really enabled businesses to scale in ways that just weren't possible before. And I think it's particularly so with small business. And that's where we're trying to make a difference. We're trying to help make that shift. We've been listening to businesses, and we want to do what we can to support businesses on their road to recovery. So whether that's funding, whether that's training, or improving our products and services to better serve their needs.
So in May 2020, you announced a bunch of initiatives to support small businesses that were impacted by the pandemic. It was $3.5 million in grants. So everything from virtual training programs, product features. So what happened? Did these initiatives make an impact?
Yeah, so what you're referencing is support programs that we announced back in May 2020, so over a year ago, and they were the impetus for how we really feel we need to continue to show up for small business. When you look at it, the Small Business Grants Program provided a much needed injection of financial support to small businesses across the country, and I'm happy to say that we've deployed funds to over 650 businesses since that timeframe. We've also partnered with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and their Canadian Business Resilience Network to run free virtual training sessions for those businesses. Now, that said, we've also continued to evolve our small business programming over the last year. We needed to truly get more specific with how we support small business, but we also wanted to make sure that we were reaching those hardest hit. So for instance, we know that BIPOC-owned businesses face barriers when starting, growing, and scaling their business. And we also know they were particularly hard hit during COVID, which is why we've tailored many of our programs over the past year to support their economic recovery and growth. And really, there's two examples I'm especially proud of. One is our work with CELAR, which is the Coalition of Innovation Leaders Against Racism, to create programs that will benefit both Black and women-owned businesses. I personally joined CELAR's membership circle, and this summer, CELAR launched a grants program for Black-led businesses with financial support from Facebook. More recently, so just a couple of weeks ago, we also partnered with We Thrive, which is an Indigenous buying guide. So think about that as a shoppable ad campaign on both Facebook and Instagram. And what it did was feature products from Indigenous owned businesses. And what was great about that, it was a collaborative effort across the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, Shopify, Ravens Capital, Powwow Pitch, and Entrepreneur. I think the best way to say it is, we are a global company, but we also know how important a role it is for us to support small business recovery, particularly here in Canada. And just know that we're going to continue to listen to small businesses, and we're going to continue to partner with leading organizations to ensure that we continually meet their needs.
And I love like all the different partnership clusters that Facebook is creating and it's at the center of. So, and how do you define Facebook's values in a Canadian context?
Yeah, I think it's tied, really to what I was just talking about. What attracted me to Facebook in the first place was really around its mission to build community and bring the world closer together. As I've said, this represented an opportunity to help support positive societal change in Canada and across its communities. And I do think, back to your starting point on the pandemic, I do think the importance of community has taken on a new meaning. I mean, we've just seen countless examples of Canadians from across the country coming together. And in many cases, they're using Facebook to help build those connections. And that's both online and offline. Like think back to the wave of caremongering early on. That was started by Meet Hands in Toronto, and that grew into a global movement. For me personally, I've been extremely proud to support This Is Our Shot. This to me was Canada at its best. And for context, for those of you who don't know it, This Is Our Shot is a coalition of businesses, communities, and frontline workers coming together to essentially promote vaccine confidence across the country. We had over 250 Canadian businesses providing support. We launched a national vaccine confidence campaign. We helped to organize local clinics. We hosted virtual town halls using local doctors and local community leaders. And we launched a website, not only addressing common questions, but letting people know where they can get vaccines. And importantly, that was done in 36 different languages. And what was great about it, it was two things. One, it was real Canadians talking to real Canadians. And secondly, it was all about communities coming together for a common goal. And I'm going to spill a little bit of news, but it worked. BCG just released the latest study, and it said that vaccine confidence campaigns helped influence 2.3 million Canadians to get a shot, which is just staggering when you think about it. So, when I look at that, whether it's a neighbor volunteering in a Facebook group or it's a national movement to encourage vaccine confidence, community is going to continue to play a role in our society. And I'm just proud to be a part of an organization that gives Canada the power to actually come together like that.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to what I was saying about Facebook being uniquely positioned to do this kind of work, Facebook can do that. That's exactly what Facebook can do. So, this takes me to it looks like there are no questions in the chat. If you have any questions, please pop them in. But my last question is, we have a new government. We are slowly emerging from the pandemic. There's a sense of we're going to be coming out of this. So what is next? What is next for you? What is next for Facebook in Canada? Anything exciting that you want to share with the audience today?
So I think I'll talk Facebook more broadly, and then I'll talk about Facebook in Canada. So Facebook more broadly, you might have heard, but we've been having a lot of conversations around the metaverse. We're going to be sharing more on that later this week. But essentially, our view of the metaverse, it's going to be the next defining era of the internet. And so for those of you who don't know the metaverse, think about it as this. Essentially 3D virtual spaces where you can share immersive experiences with other people, even when you can't get together physically. So think like real presence within a digital environment. For Facebook, it's going to usher in a new chapter for us as a company. Now, as I said, I can't say much more right now, but I hope you'll keep an eye out for my newsletter in the coming week. And so that's the metaverse. Now, in Canada specifically, one of the areas I've been highly focused on, and it touches on what I was just speaking about, is this whole idea of coalition and community building. Like, really, when you think around the concept of businesses, industry groups, civic organizations, small business, nonprofits, community leaders coming together for a single purpose, like, that is an unbelievably powerful concept, and I'm hoping we can do more of it. You know, I've mentioned examples like Canada United, and this is our shot, but there's just so many more things that we can solve if we come together. So all that said, when it comes to our work in Canada, nothing we do is in a vacuum. I mean, these programs would not be possible without close partnerships. And this isn't just with industry, but this is also working at a grassroots level. But I hope what's clear is that our values as Canadians has really shaped how Facebook does business here at home. And hopefully it's those values that are going to continue to drive us into the future.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Garrick.
My
this
pleasure.
was a great discussion. And thank you so much for answering all of those questions. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We have some more great fireside chats coming up over the course of the week. So keep an eye on your inbox. But everyone, thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Garrick. Everyone stay safe. So and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. But bye for now.
Thanks again, Jason.